$15 million. His voice boomed across the medical billing floor like a war cry. Every conversation stopped. Every keyboard went silent. You've been stealing from our clients, billing for services that never existed, and I have the proof right here. I felt 30 faces turn toward me, their expressions shifting from curiosity to horror. My supervisor, Garrett, stood behind my chair waving a thick folder above his head like some kind of trophy. His face had turned that particular shade of red that meant he'd rehearsed this moment in his bathroom mirror. "This lawsuit will ruin you completely," he continued, his voice carrying that theatrical edge he used during team meetings. "Security is on their way up to escort you out permanently. You're finished in this industry." The silence stretched like a rubber band about to snap. I could hear Melody from accounting whisper something to her neighbor. Someone's chair squeaked. The copy machine hummed in the background, completely unaware that my entire world was supposedly crumbling. But here's the thing about moments like this. They reveal who you really are. I stayed seated. My fingers found their familiar rhythm against the desk surface, a steady drumbeat that seemed to echo in the sudden quiet. A smile started at the corner of my mouth, the kind that comes from knowing something nobody else does. "Before we make any dramatic moves," I said, my voice cutting through his performance like a knife through butter, "maybe you'd like to see what I've been keeping safe in here." I reached for my bottom desk drawer. The change in Garrett's face was instant. All that manufactured rage drained away like water from a broken dam. His mouth opened slightly, then closed. The folder in his hands trembled just enough for me to notice. "What are you doing?" he asked, but his voice had lost all its thunder. My hand rested on the drawer handle. "Just thought you might want to know what I do in my spare time." The entire department leaned forward without realizing it. Garrett took a step back. 3 months ago, I'd been just another face in this sterile office, processing medical claims and wondering why some procedures generated such unusually high insurance payouts. Patients I'd never heard of. Treatments that seemed too expensive. And most interesting of all, my supervisor's sudden ability to afford a luxury sports car on a manager's salary. But instead of reporting him like any normal person would do, I'd done something else entirely. I'd applied for a different kind of job. The State Insurance Fraud Investigation Unit had been thrilled to have someone willing to work from the inside. Within 2 weeks, I was living a double life, processing bills during the day, feeding information to investigators at night. Every fake patient account Garrett created, every inflated procedure he approved, every dollar he thought he was stealing, I'd been tracking it all. But that wasn't even the best part. The best part was what I'd been doing with his money. Each time Garrett siphoned funds from those insurance overpayments, each time he thought he was building his secret fortune, I'd been making sure those exact amounts ended up somewhere he'd never expect. A victim compensation fund managed by the state. He'd been working overtime, staying late, processing more fraudulent claims than ever before, convinced he was getting rich. He had no idea he'd been funding his own victims' recovery accounts. The lawsuit he'd just announced, that was supposed to be his grand finale. Frame me for everything. Claim I was the mastermind behind the fraud, then disappear with his hidden money before anyone could investigate properly. My drawer slid open with a soft whisper. I pulled out a single business card and held it up so everyone could see. The state seal gleamed under the fluorescent lights. "State Insurance Fraud Investigation Division," I announced clearly. "Special Investigator. That's actually my job title here." Garrett's knees buckled slightly. He grabbed the edge of my desk to steady himself. "Every transaction you've processed in the last 90 days has been monitored and reversed," I continued, standing up slowly. "That $700,000 you think you've stolen? It's been sitting in a state-controlled account, earning interest for the people you hurt." The office remained frozen in absolute silence. "Oh, and that beautiful new car you bought last month?" I smiled wider. "Purchased with state funds as part of our investigation. We own it now." His hands started shaking. "But here's my absolute favorite part," I said, savoring every word like fine wine. "Remember all those extra hours you put in? All those weekends you spent here, staying late to process those high-value fake claims? You were so dedicated, so thorough." I paused, letting the weight of my words sink in. "You built the most complete fraud case our department has ever assembled. Against yourself." 2 people in plain clothes stepped off the elevator. They'd been waiting in the lobby all morning. One of them held up a badge. "The warrant was signed at 9 this morning," he announced. "All accounts frozen. All assets seized." As they began reading Garrett his rights, I gathered my personal items from the desk. My actual supervisor from the fraud division appeared beside me. someone Garrett had never met. Outstanding work, she said quietly. He generated enough material to put himself away for 20 years. The insurance companies are calling this the cleanest operation they've ever witnessed. I looked back at Garrett one more time. He was staring at the handcuffs, finally understanding that every single move he'd made had been planned by me. The beautiful irony? I called out as they led him toward the elevator. You actually were stealing $15 million. You just never got to keep a single penny of it. But wait, let me tell you how this really started. Because the woman who just destroyed Garrett's life wasn't always this calculating. My name is Raven, and 6 months ago, I was a completely different person. If you're loving this story of ultimate workplace revenge, hit that like button and subscribe for more incredible true stories that will keep you on the edge of your seat. Trust me, you won't want to miss what happens next. And drop a comment telling me, have you ever suspected someone at work of stealing? Because what I discovered next will blow your mind. I used to believe in playing by the rules. I used to think that hard work and loyalty would eventually pay off. I used to trust that people in authority positions had earned their power through merit. That was before I met Garrett. 6 months earlier, I'd been working as a medical billing specialist at a mid-sized healthcare administration company. It wasn't glamorous work, but I was good at it. Really good. I could spot discrepancies in insurance claims faster than anyone else in the department, and I took pride in making sure healthcare providers got paid accurately for their services. Garrett had been my supervisor for about 8 months when I first noticed something odd. A patient named Vincent had supposedly received a series of expensive cardiac procedures at a clinic across town. The total billing came to nearly $40,000, which wasn't unusual for heart surgery. But when I cross-referenced the patient information with the clinic's records, something didn't match up. Vincent's address led to an empty lot. His phone number was disconnected. His insurance information was valid, but when I called the insurance company, they had no record of authorizing those procedures. I brought it to Garrett's attention during our weekly review meeting. Must be a clerical error, he said without even looking at the file. These things happen. Just process it through. But it kept happening. More patients with questionable addresses, more procedures that seemed too convenient, more insurance payouts that made my instincts scream that something was wrong. The breaking point came when I discovered a patient who'd supposedly received a kidney transplant, while the same patient was listed as having received a different kidney transplant at another facility 3 weeks earlier. Unless this person had been born with 3 kidneys, someone was lying. When I brought this to Garrett again, his response was different. Raven, he said, closing my file without reading it, you're being overly cautious. These medical facilities know what they're doing. Our job is to process claims, not to play detective. That's when I knew for certain something was wrong. Because any legitimate supervisor would want to investigate potential fraud. Any honest manager would be concerned about processing false claims. But Garrett wanted me to stop looking too closely at the details, so I started watching him instead. I became a student of Garrett's habits. I arrived early and stayed late, not to impress him, but to observe him. I watched which files he accessed when he thought nobody was around. I paid attention to which phone calls he took behind closed doors. I noticed when he started wearing expensive watches and driving a car that cost more than twice his annual salary. The breakthrough came on a Tuesday evening in late February. I'd told everyone I was leaving for the day, but instead I'd hidden in the supply closet down the hall. Through the gap in the door, I watched Garrett return to his office after the cleaning crew had finished their rounds. He spent the next 2 hours working on something that definitely wasn't part of his regular duties. I could see him typing, printing pages, and making phone calls in hushed tones. When he finally left, I waited another 30 minutes before slipping back into the office. His computer was locked, but Garrett had made a crucial mistake. He'd left a printed email on his desk, probably planning to shred it in the morning. The email was from someone named Craig at a medical clinic, thanking Garrett for processing the Patterson account so quickly and mentioning that the usual split will be transferred by Friday. Patterson was one of the patients I'd flagged as suspicious. I photographed the email with my phone and started digging deeper into the Patterson file the next morning. What I found made my stomach turn. Patterson had supposedly received a series of cancer treatments totaling $68,000, but when I called the clinic directly, they had no record of anyone by that name ever being treated there. The insurance company had already paid out the full amount. That's when I realized the scope of what Garrett was doing. He wasn't just stealing money. He was stealing money that was supposed to help sick people. Every fake claim he processed meant real patients somewhere else might have their legitimate treatments denied due to increased fraud prevention measures. But confronting him directly would have been useless. Garrett was too smart to leave obvious traces, and he had administrative access to systems I couldn't touch. If I reported him through normal channels, he'd have time to destroy anything incriminating and probably find a way to blame me for whatever investigators discovered. That's when I had an idea that would have seemed impossible to the old Raven. I started researching the State Insurance Fraud Investigation Division. They had a website with information about their ongoing cases and how they operated. What caught my attention was a section about undercover operations and how they sometimes worked with inside informants in suspected fraud rings. I spent a week crafting the perfect application. I emphasized my billing experience, my ability to spot discrepancies, and most importantly, my suspicion that my current workplace might be involved in systematic fraud. I didn't mention Garrett by name, but I provided enough specific details about the suspicious claims I'd identified to get their attention. The response came faster than I'd expected. Within 3 days, I received a call from Special Agent Caroline who wanted to meet in person. We arranged to meet at a small restaurant across town, far from anywhere Garrett might accidentally see us. Caroline was nothing like what I'd expected from a government investigator. She was probably in her 40s. With graying hair and the kind of tired eyes that come from seeing too much human greed. But when I showed her the photograph of Garrett's email and explained the pattern of suspicious claims I'd identified, those tired eyes became very sharp, very quickly. "How long has this been going on?" she asked. "At least 8 months that I can prove," I told her. "Probably longer. And you think your supervisor is working directly with medical facilities to create false claims?" "I think he's running an entire network. The amounts are too large and too coordinated for him to be working alone." Caroline studied the information I'd brought for nearly 20 minutes without speaking. Finally, she looked up at me, with an expression I couldn't quite read. "We've been investigating reports of organized medical billing fraud in your area for over a year," she said, "but we've never had someone on the inside before. If you're willing to work with us, we might be able to build a case that shuts down the entire operation." "What would that involve?" "You'd continue working at your current job, but everything you do would be coordinated with our investigation. We'd provide you with specialized software to track transactions, and you'd report directly to me. But Raven, you need to understand, this isn't a game. If your supervisor realizes what you're doing, it could be dangerous." I thought about all the sick people whose legitimate claims might have been delayed or denied because of Garrett's fraud. I thought about the insurance companies who'd been paying out money for treatments that never happened. I thought about how Garrett had looked me in the eye and told me to stop asking questions about obvious fraud. "When do I start?" Caroline smiled for the first time since we'd met. "You already have." The next 3 months were the most intense of my life. During the day, I performed my regular job duties while secretly installing monitoring software on the office computers. Caroline had provided me with programs that could track every keystroke, every file access, and every transaction that passed through our systems. At night, I transmitted everything to the investigation team and helped them piece together the scope of Garrett's operation. What we discovered was far worse than I'd initially suspected. Garrett wasn't just working with 1 or 2 clinics. He'd built relationships with more than a dozen medical facilities across 3 counties. Some were legitimate clinics whose administrators had been corrupted by easy money. Others were complete fabrications, fake medical offices that existed only on paper, with rented mailboxes and disconnected phone numbers. The network processed false claims for everything from routine checkups to major surgeries. They specialized in procedures that were difficult for insurance companies to verify quickly: mental health treatments, physical therapy sessions, expensive diagnostic tests. By the time an insurance investigator could contact a patient to confirm they'd received treatment, the money had already been distributed and the trail had gone cold. But the most shocking discovery was how sophisticated the operation had become. Garrett and his associates had created an entire database of fake patients, complete with fabricated medical histories, insurance information, and even fake family members who could verify treatments if investigators called to check. They'd stolen the identities of real people, some living, some deceased, and used those identities to create convincing medical profiles. A construction worker from 2 counties over had supposedly received expensive cancer treatments without ever knowing his identity had been used. A retired teacher had apparently undergone multiple surgeries while she was actually traveling across the country visiting her grandchildren. Caroline estimated the total fraud at somewhere between $12 and $15 million over the past 2 years. This is the largest medical billing fraud case we've ever encountered in this region, she told me during one of our evening meetings. And we couldn't have built this case without your help. But building the case was only half the challenge. The other half was timing the arrests perfectly so that nobody in the network could escape or destroy crucial information. That's where Garrett's personality worked against him in ways he never could have imagined. He was paranoid about getting caught, which made him meticulous about creating backups of everything. He kept detailed records of every transaction, every fake patient file, every payment split with his network of corrupt clinics. In his mind, this information was insurance. If anyone in his network tried to betray him, he could destroy them with his comprehensive records of their involvement. What he didn't realize was that those same comprehensive records would become the foundation of the case against him. Caroline's team had been monitoring his computer activities for weeks, watching him update his files and back up his data. Every time he tried to protect himself from his criminal associates, he was actually making our case stronger. But Garrett was getting nervous. Several times during March, I caught him staring at me when he thought I wasn't looking. He'd started asking subtle questions about my work, wanting to know why I was staying late some evenings, and whether I'd noticed anything unusual about our claim processing procedures. The tension in the office had become almost unbearable. I could feel Garrett's suspicion growing every day, but I couldn't change my behavior without raising even more questions. I had to continue acting like the dedicated employee I'd always been while secretly coordinating with federal investigators to bring down the man who signed my paychecks. Then, on a Thursday morning in early April, everything started falling apart. I arrived at work to find Garrett in a heated phone conversation behind his closed office door. Even through the walls, I could hear him saying things like, "Too risky," and "We need to shut this down temporarily." When he finally emerged, his face was pale, and he was sweating despite the office air conditioning. "Raven," he said, his voice unnaturally casual, "I need you to pull all the files for patients whose last names start with M through R. There's been some kind of system glitch, and we need to verify that all the information was processed correctly." This was a lie. There had been no system glitch, and asking me to pull files alphabetically made no sense for any legitimate verification process. But those files included most of the fake patients I'd been tracking for Caroline's investigation. Garrett was trying to determine how much I knew. I spent the entire day walking a tightrope, pulling the requested files while trying to act like I hadn't noticed the pattern of false information they contained. Every time Garrett walked past my desk, I could feel him watching me, looking for any sign that I understood what I was handling. That evening, I met Caroline at our usual restaurant, but this time she wasn't alone. 2 other agents sat at our table, and their expressions were grim. "We think Garrett suspects something," Caroline said without preamble. "Our monitoring software detected that he's been running security scans on the office computers, looking for unauthorized programs." My heart started racing. "Does he know about the monitoring software you installed?" "We don't think so, but he knows something isn't right, and that makes this situation extremely dangerous for you." "What do you mean?" One of the other agents, a man named Paul, leaned forward. "When people running fraud operations feel cornered, they look for someone to blame, someone to frame for their crimes so they can escape clean." "You think he's planning to frame me?" "We think he's already planning it," Caroline said, "which is why we need to move faster than we'd originally intended." "How much faster?" "We're executing the arrests tomorrow morning, all locations simultaneously, so nobody in the network can warn the others." I felt a mixture of relief and terror. After months of living this double life, it would finally be over. But I also realized that if something went wrong, if Garrett somehow escaped or if the case fell apart, my life would be ruined. "There's one more thing," Caroline said, her voice softer now. "We've been monitoring Garrett's communications, and we know he's planning to make some kind of move against you tomorrow. We don't know exactly what, but our technical team intercepted fragments of emails mentioning your name and phrases like taking the fall and lawsuit. He's going to try to frame me for everything? That's our assessment. Which is why tomorrow morning, instead of conducting a normal arrest, we're going to let Garrett make his move first. We want to catch him in the act of trying to frame you for his crimes." Paul pulled out a small device that looked like a hearing aid. "You'll wear this tomorrow. It's a transmitter that will broadcast everything happening around you directly to our surveillance team. We'll have agents positioned throughout your building, and the moment Garrett tries to frame you, we'll move in." I stared at the tiny device. realizing that my life was about to change in ways I couldn't even imagine. What if something goes wrong? What if he actually convinces everyone that I'm the one who's been stealing? Caroline reached across the table and squeezed my hand. Raven, you've helped us build the most comprehensive fraud case in the history of this state. We have records of every transaction, every fake patient, every criminal contact in Garrett's network. There is absolutely no way he can frame you for crimes we can prove he committed. But as I drove home that night, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was walking into a trap. Tomorrow would determine whether I emerged as the hero who brought down a criminal network, or as the scapegoat who took the blame for $15 million in theft. The next morning, I arrived at work with Caroline's transmitter hidden in my ear, and my heart hammering so hard I was sure everyone could hear it. But I had no idea that Garrett's plan to destroy me would actually become the final piece needed to destroy him instead. The moment he started screaming about that $15 million lawsuit, I knew exactly what Caroline had meant about letting him make his move first. And I also knew that in about 30 seconds, Garrett's entire world was about to collapse in the most spectacular way possible. The elevator doors opened and Caroline stepped out, followed by Paul and 3 other agents I'd never seen before. But Caroline wasn't wearing the casual clothes I was used to seeing her in. She was dressed in a formal business suit with a badge prominently displayed on her jacket. "Good morning, everyone," she announced to the entire office. "I'm Special Agent Caroline Morrison, with the State Insurance Fraud Investigation Division. We're here to execute several warrants related to an ongoing investigation." Garrett's face went through a series of transformations that would have been funny if the situation weren't so serious. First confusion, then recognition as he realized who Caroline was, then absolute terror as he understood what was happening. "Wait," he stammered, still holding the folder he'd been waving around minutes earlier. "There's been some mistake. I'm the one who discovered the fraud. Raven is the one you want. I have proof right here that she's been stealing millions." Paul stepped forward and took the folder from Garrett's hands. He opened it and glanced through the papers inside, then looked up with an expression of professional amusement. "These are very interesting," he said loudly enough for everyone to hear. "These appear to be fabricated documents designed to implicate Miss Raven in crimes that our investigation has determined were committed by you, Mr. Garrett." "That's impossible," Garrett protested. "I've been tracking her activities for months. She's been processing fake claims, working with corrupt medical facilities, stealing money from insurance companies." Caroline walked over to stand next to my desk. "Mr. Garrett, we've been monitoring every computer in this office for the past 3 months. We have complete records of every transaction, every file access, every communication. Would you like to know what our investigation revealed?" The entire office was listening now. Everyone gathered around like we were performing some kind of play. Melody from accounting had actually pulled up a chair to get a better view. "We discovered that over the past 2 years, someone in this office has been running a sophisticated medical billing fraud operation," Caroline continued. "This person created fake patient accounts, established relationships with corrupt medical facilities, and processed fraudulent insurance claims totaling approximately $15 million. Garrett opened his mouth to speak, but Caroline held up her hand. "We also discovered that this same person has been extremely paranoid about getting caught, which led them to create detailed backup files of every criminal transaction they processed. Files that they stored on their work computer, thinking they were protecting themselves from their criminal associates." Paul pulled out a tablet and began reading from it. "Vincent Patterson, fake patient cardiac surgery, billing $43,000. Created by user account G. Morrison on February 15th at 2:47 a.m. Garrett's face went white. "Jennifer Walsh, fake patient, cancer treatment, billing $68,000. Created by user account G. Morrison on February 22nd at 11:15 p.m. "That's not possible," Garrett whispered. "Michael Torres, fake patient, kidney surgery, billing $92,000. Created by user account G. Morrison on March 3rd at 1:33 a.m. Paul looked up from his tablet. "Should I keep going? Because we have records of over 300 fake patients, all created by your user account, all processed outside of normal business hours when you thought nobody would notice." But Caroline wasn't finished with him yet. "Here's what makes this case particularly interesting," she said, walking closer to Garrett. "About 4 months ago, we received a tip from someone in this office who had noticed suspicious billing patterns. This person was concerned that their workplace might be involved in insurance fraud." She gestured toward me. "That person was Raven. She contacted our investigation division because she suspected her supervisor was stealing money from insurance companies. The room was so quiet I could hear the air conditioning cycling on, so we offered Raven a position as an undercover investigator. For the past 3 months, she's been working as our inside operative, tracking every fraudulent transaction you processed, and feeding that information directly to our investigation team. Garrett stared at me like he was seeing a ghost. But here's the truly beautiful part of this operation, Caroline continued, and I could hear the satisfaction in her voice. Raven didn't just help us track your crimes, she helped us reverse them. What do you mean, reverse them? Someone from accounting called out. Caroline smiled. Every time Garrett thought he was stealing money from insurance overpayments, that money was actually being redirected into a victim compensation fund managed by our division. He spent months working overtime, processing fraudulent claims, thinking he was building a secret fortune. She paused for effect. In reality, every dollar he stole was immediately transferred to an account that will be used to compensate the people whose identities he used for his fake patients. Garrett has spent the last 3 months working harder than he's ever worked in his life to fund his own victims' recovery accounts. The laughter that rippled through the office was probably inappropriate given the seriousness of the situation, but I couldn't blame my coworkers for finding some humor in Garrett's complete humiliation. The car he bought last month, Caroline added, purchased with state funds as part of our sting operation. The expensive watches, the new clothes, the fancy dinners he's been bragging about, all paid for with money that belongs to the state of state name, and all of it has been tracked and will be recovered. Garrett finally found his voice. But the lawsuit, he said desperately. I have proof that Raven was working with criminal medical facilities. I have phone records, financial transactions. Paul held up the folder Garrett had been waving around earlier. You mean these fabricated documents that you spent all last night creating? The ones that our monitoring software watched you produce in real time? He opened the folder and pulled out several sheets of paper. Fake phone records, showing calls between Raven and medical facilities she's never contacted. Fabricated financial statements, suggesting she received payments from accounts that don't exist. Forged emails that our technical team can prove were created on your computer using your login credentials. Caroline stepped closer to Garrett. Your plan was to frame Raven for your crimes, file a fake lawsuit to make yourself look like a whistleblower, then disappear with the money you thought you'd hidden in various accounts. But every account you opened, every transaction you made, every criminal contact you established, we were watching all of it. This is impossible, Garrett said, but his voice had no conviction left in it. No, Garrett, this is justice. 2 agents moved behind him and began the arrest process. But Caroline wasn't done talking. Ladies and gentlemen, she announced to the entire office, I want you to understand what Raven accomplished here. She didn't just help us catch one criminal. She helped us dismantle an entire network of medical billing fraud that was operating across 3 counties. She pulled out her own tablet and began reading. Based on the information Raven provided and the evidence we gathered during this operation, we executed simultaneous arrests this morning at 14 different locations, 12 corrupt medical facilities, 2 fake clinic operations, and over 30 individuals involved in systematic insurance fraud. The office erupted in applause, but Caroline held up her hand for silence. The total recovery amount will exceed $15 million, all of which will be returned to insurance companies and used to compensate victims of identity theft. This is the largest medical billing fraud bust in our state's history. As they led Garrett toward the elevator, he looked back at me one more time. How long? He asked quietly. How long were you working against me? I thought about all the nights I'd spent transmitting his criminal activities to Caroline's team, all the fake patients whose accounts I'd helped track, all the stolen money I'd helped redirect to victim compensation funds. From the moment you told me to stop asking questions about obvious fraud, I said. From the second you made it clear that you wanted me to ignore crimes that hurt sick people. The elevator doors closed, and Garrett was gone. Caroline walked over to my desk and shook my hand. Raven, what you accomplished here goes far beyond what we initially hoped for. You didn't just help us catch a criminal, you helped us restore money to people who desperately needed it. She gestured to the folder of fabricated documents Garrett had tried to use against me. And the fact that he tried to frame you with obviously fake materials just added additional charges to his case. Obstruction of justice, filing false reports, attempted fraud against a federal investigator. How long will he be in prison? With the amount of money involved and the scope of the operation, 25 to 30 years minimum. He'll be an old man before he sees freedom again. Paul appeared beside us with a final piece of information that made everything perfect. The network analysis is complete, he told Caroline. Garrett kept such detailed records of his criminal operation that we've been able to identify and freeze assets belonging to all of his associates. Full recovery of stolen funds plus interest penalties. He looked at me with genuine respect. Raven, criminals usually try to cover their tracks, but Garrett's paranoia about his criminal partners led him to document everything so thoroughly that he basically wrote our entire case for us. As the investigation team packed up their equipment and prepared to leave, Caroline handed me a business card, a real one this time, not the prop I'd used during Garrett's arrest. "We'd like to offer you a permanent position with our fraud investigation division," she said. "What you've demonstrated here, the patience, the intelligence, the courage to do what's right even when it's dangerous, those are exactly the qualities we need." I looked around the office where I'd spent months living a double life, where I'd watched Garrett steal millions of dollars while thinking he was smarter than everyone else, where I'd learned that sometimes the best revenge is simply letting criminals destroy themselves with their own greed. When do I start? As I walked out of that building for the last time, I realized that the woman who'd been too trusting, too naive, too willing to believe that people in authority positions had earned their power through merit, that woman was gone forever. In her place was someone who understood that real justice sometimes requires patience, planning, and the willingness to let bad people think they're winning right up until the moment they lose everything. If this story of ultimate workplace justice got your heart racing, smash that like button and subscribe for more incredible true stories of people who refuse to let criminals get away with their crimes. Drop a comment and tell me, what would you have done in Raven's situation? Because sometimes the best revenge is simply giving people exactly what they deserve.